Thank you for the presentation. Just a small comment. I was wondering if there's anything that we can do from here for the traffic activists that have been arrested. We talked about it briefly, but I think it would be nice to share it with everyone.
Okay.
Volevo fare un piccolo appunto su come circolano anche le pratiche di difesa. La pettorina che ci ha fatto vedere Kevin, il giacchettino, era molto usato nel movimento no global italiano, nelle manifestazioni contro il G20, il G7, eccetera, dove il legal team si distingueva per questo e anche noi avevamo questi bigliettini. E quindi vedo che è una pratica che continua ad essere usata, era molto utile per chi non vede organizzati con un numero di telefono di un avvocato a disposizione. Mi veniva in mente questo, io sto vedendo negli interventi, nelle testimonianze, molti temi ricorrenti. Uno dei temi è anche la difesa legale. Forse uno degli obiettivi anche di questo workshop è mantenersi in contatto anche in futuro. Probabilmente al di là dei diversi ordinamenti giuridici e delle specificità dei codici penali dei vari stati, ci potrebbero anche essere, mi veniva in mente delle collaborazioni su come si potrebbe anche costruire una difesa nell'appellarsi ad organismi sovranazionali dove l'esperienza potrebbe essere anche comune. Stavo pensando, è stato prodotto dai movimenti salentini, dai loro avvocati e dai loro consulenti giuridici un dossier sulla repressione in Salento sulla base delle linee guida dell'OSCE. E le linee guida dell'OSCE sono uguali per tutti i paesi che aderiscono all'OSCE, in modo da poter denunciare più facilmente all'OSCE la violazione delle regole che l'OSCE stessa si è data rispetto alla garanzia della partecipazione democratica. Abbiamo scoperto che alcune cose che vengono sanzionate per il nostro codice penale italiano sono contrarie a queste linee guida che il nostro paese formalmente dovrebbe aver recepito. Probabilmente ci sono delle corti internazionali dove poter ricorrere e dove ci sono anche delle procedure, delle modalità per costruire dei ricorsi e che vanno al di là del diritto penale dei singoli stati, quindi potrebbe essere la circolazione di una conoscenza comune qualora anche in Inghilterra, in Olanda, in Francia si volesse utilizzare gli stessi sistemi. Chiaramente io non ho una fiducia illimitata in questo, però visto la gravità degli attacchi che tutti subiamo, dobbiamo utilizzare tutte le forme, quindi anche questo. Quindi volevo porla come possibilità di collaborazione, anche dopo la fine di questo incontro.
Simple question for both of you, perhaps from the beginning when you guys decided. How, I like your lessons, right? I was thinking of what have you learned about how should movements deal with infiltrators, with police informers? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Say again?
With police informers, I mean, how do you deal with intruders or people, infiltrators, right?
So starting with the first question, which was about the three anti-fracking campaigners who went to prison last week. there's been some discussions already about the idea of people from here writing to them in prison. It is an incredibly powerful way of sending your solidarity, and it is something which is being organised because it's also a way of saying that we care about the people that are sent to prison. Because if we don't do that, and people go to prison, they will come out and they will walk away from the movements if they think that people don't care. So there's a concerted effort to try and get letters from all over the world sent to those 3 young men who are in prison now. I have the details of their names, the address and the prison numbers that are necessary to send in those letters, and there's a number of people here, including the person who asked the question, who has got postcards that are available, and we would like to try and see if there are people here, both today and tomorrow, but maybe in the longer term, if we leave the details, to just send a letter in and say, we heard about your case and we're sending you solidarity, because having done letter writing for prisoners before, I can assure you it has a massive impact on people's morale and crucially on their ability their willingness to stay involved in the movement when they come out. On the international solidarity question, that's a really important one. The tabars, the orange bibs that we have here, have appeared on demonstrations before, but what's important is not just that there are observers on the day, but there is some form of backup and support for them. And crucially, one of the lessons that came out from protests in, particularly against the G20 protest in London in 2009, was the need for that legal support not to kind of disappear once the protests were over. So there was a decision made that there would be a permanent network of groups to do legal monitoring of protests, to retain that knowledge and that experience of people who've been out on the streets, who know what police tactics are, can recognise what happens. Much of the training that we do is basic common sense. It would be, although the legal systems here and other countries are different, obviously the tactics of the police are going to be different. The task of documenting what they do is relatively straightforward. It doesn't change from one country to the next. I think it would be wonderful if there was an Italian version of Green and Black Cross. And I think that the Green and Black Cross organisation, who are one of the founding members of Netpol, would be delighted to pass on resources and time and advice if that was something that people wanted to do. Just one final point as well. I think the idea of wanting to take challenges to an international level is important, but one of the things that we've definitely found from the experiences of using the evidence that's gathered at protests to support people who go to court is the poor quality of the evidence that's presented by the police. Police are just not very good at lying, and they can't remember the lies that they've told. And if there's somebody there that has very effectively documented throughout the day the actions of the police, usually more than one person from different angles, that corroborates the photographs that may have been taken, this is what makes sure that people don't go to prison. This is the evidence that is vital to make sure that people have their convictions overturned if they are convicted. So, although I think the international dimension is important, the local is stopping people from being prosecuted in the first place is just as important too, and that comes from that comprehensive gathering of material that on behalf of the movements, basically, rather than on behalf of the police. The question about police informers is an incredibly complicated one, and there will always be police informers in social movements if they are in any way demonstrating any effectiveness. And one of the problems is that because you have such a mixture of people coming into a social movement or a campaign, that it's very difficult to be able to know who is a police informer and who isn't. Generally speaking, some of you will know that there's been some exposure of the use of undercover police officers against peaceful social movements in the UK. There is a public inquiry taking place at the moment on this issue. But the one thing that was clear is that the person who turned out to be the police informant was usually very popular and very helpful, and usually had a van so could drive people around. It was never the person that people might think was the obvious person, the most disruptive person, because it's more subtle than that. And one of the dangers is that if you become obsessed with trying to find the police informer in your ranks, you end up pointing fingers at each other and do the job of destroying your own movement by becoming paranoid. The solution to that is transparency and accountability in what you do, making sure that things like money and decisions are open and they're democratic, finding ways essentially to stop the police from dividing one group of people against each other. I mean, that's the only advice that we can give, although there is a group that I work with called the Undercover Research Group, who've done a very interesting 15 points to look for. If somebody fits a number of these points, then it's at least worth exploring further. But they are based on the tactics of the British police, and they're going to be different from one country to the next. Okay.
I don't have a huge amount to add on that, but in reverse order, I think that the issue of police infiltrators, the kind of major revelations about that, or the stories broke just at the beginning, pretty close to the beginning of the anti-fracking movement, and it has undoubtedly affected people. It's made a lot of people very jumpy, and it's also made it quite difficult for people from the outside to go in and find out what's happening, build. It just takes an awful lot of time, I think, certainly from an academic point of view, to build up relationships with different groups so that you're able to be involved. And that kind of links to the second question, is that part of the kind of solidarity that's really good to see here is that there are, academics involved in being useful. And I think there is a role for academics, universities, scholarly work to contribute to the process of making sense of this, but also to document what's going on as part of that process, to see yourself see academic work as part of a movement. But there is a need, I think, to start to join the dots, and I think that's where perhaps organisations like Netpol at a national level and the people like the Transnational Institute at an international level have a really important role to play in connecting these movements together so that we can share experiences, but also so we can join the dots ourselves and help develop our understanding of what is going on. And there's a function for academics as a small part of that, perhaps.
I suppose exploring the theory from what you're drawing on. You mentioned two things. Specification is shaped and is limited. I think there was a third one. It's shaped and limited by resistance and by direct action. So I guess I wanted to ask you, first of all, if it's shaped, how do you understand that? What is it? So shaped, I fear that perhaps it's not shaped, but rather the methodology or the methods are shaped, rather than the specification is shaped. And limited, how do we know? How do we know that it's limited, or how do we measure that? So this goes back to our discussion in the last couple of days on strategy, right? Mm-hmm. So if we can identify that these are kind of eruptions in specification, right, then how can we make sense of that? What can we do?
Okay. Is that on? That's on. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, try and answer that. I think this is a kind of theoretical, conceptual work in progress to make sense of pacification, but I think there is a recognition that it is never a complete process, and that it is, historically, maybe it is more about the methods and the overall approach, but I think to think of it as being shaped at a kind of local level, the form that pacification takes in relation to the use of police power and in combination with the law. So there is a sense that it is being shaped by the struggle. It's difficult because I think we see in relation to many people involved in the movement on the peripheries that we speak to lots of people who say, this has had the desired effect. I will restrict my political activism to letter writing and signing petitions because I don't want to go and get arrested, or I don't want to go and get attacked by the police. So it has an effect in reproducing that idea of people wanting to do their political action in a sanctioned form. But on the other hand, it has a very different effect to a lot of people involved in the movement, that it has a radicalising effect, that many people who've come to this as political novices or have never been involved in activism, that the attempt to pacify, the attempt to produce the kind of docile political protest that has actually had, it's been counterproductive, and that the movement has grown with a dual focus, that there is an emphasis on the industry in the way that's backed by the state, but there's an explicit emphasis on the police. And people have told us in our research time and time again that their involvement in direct action protests has been motivated by the violence of the police. They wouldn't have got involved otherwise, or they maybe wouldn't have got involved as soon or in the way that they did, but it's in response to the state. But they see through the police the function of the state, and it has been like Kevin said, it's a deeply traumatic experience for a lot of people, both in terms of facing the brutality, but also in their realisation of what the state is and what it does, and that has been profoundly traumatic. With a lot of conversations with people, though, they are deeply traumatised just by that change in recognition. But that has radicalised people, and it has galvanised the movement. So there is something, as a continuing work for scholars, to make sense of what effect does that have, and where are the continuities historically with the ways in which pacification or attempts to pacify populations have been limited by struggle, and I don't have the answer. In relation to the second question, I need to defer to lawyers in the room. I think I wouldn't want to do you a disservice by trying to answer that. Or I may pass over to my colleague.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer either. Although I would say that regardless of what the laws are, there is also an obligation on states that are signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights to at least consider Articles 10 and 11, freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. And although they are qualified rights, so they can be restricted by other circumstances such as public safety and security, it is the obligation on the state to be able to show that it's at least considered not completely removing people's rights to be able to protest in their entirety. So that is something I think that some lawyers here would need to look into. I don't know anything about Italian law, unfortunately. I would certainly back up what Will said about the fact that pacification, in its efforts to try and restrict people's ability to protest, doesn't always win. That in the process of attempting to use repression to stop people from resisting environmental catastrophe or whatever it might be, it is forced to change track by the fact that people are radicalised by the process that they go through. It's really interesting that I've seen support from elected representatives here, from the local mayor and from other villages. That is replicated in the UK. People who would never have been the sort of person who would ever even go on a protest are now evangelists for direct action, and they're parish and county councillors in Lancashire. That happened because they witnessed people that they know, their neighbours, their friends, people who often were their electorate, being brutalised. And I think that is likely to continue. That kind of experience of seeing what the state is capable of will put some people off, but also will encourage others to decide that they're going to do more.